It is Thursday, March 1st, 2018, and this is the MMA Beat. Welcome, everyone. My name is Luke Thomas. I am the host of this program today. Before we intro the rest of the team here, let me just apologize for being tardy. Believe it or not, I get up at 5 a.m. from Washington, D.C. to come here to do these. Apparently, that's not enough time.
Apparently, 4:30.
Yeah, I guess I have to get up at 4 from now on. There were delays on the rail system in every imaginable direction, so I am so sorry that we got started late. I appreciate your patience. Thank you guys so much. Okay, without any further ado, as I mentioned, my name is Luke Thomas from MMA Fighting and SiriusXM. The man to my left, that is Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post, the man in the shirt, of course. And at the far end of the table is El Niño Colombiano, Danny Segura from MMAfighting.com. Okay.
I had a very relaxing train ride in, by the way.
Yeah, well,
and the subway was so smooth. I got here so fast. It was really nice.
There was a person hit on the subway train that I was on, so we couldn't get on it anymore. I don't feel bad for that person anymore. I really don't. They made me delayed, so I don't feel bad for them. And then I had the world's dumbest cab driver, who I really just wanted to strangle. So neither here nor there. Let's get to this. Let's get to the stories, boys. All right. We have to start this show with the most important news of the week. I have weighed in on it on my podcast, so I really am very curious to hear what you guys have to say. Jon Jones, as we all know, went before the California State Athletic Commission, almost said Nevada, for his hearing related to an anti-doping offense surrounding his time at UFC 214 for an oral steroid known as Turinabol. Everybody knows that. Jeff, let me start with you. We all saw how it went down. The reaction was that it went pretty negative for Jon, but in the end, the punishment handed down by California was not necessarily all that severe. I want to get to that in greater detail in just a minute, but if I could pitch the first question to you, it would be, your biggest takeaway from the hearing was what?
That Jon Jones has not grown up. I think all of the actual nuts and bolts of the case, the substance that he popped for, none of that was in dispute. It was almost as though this hearing didn't necessarily even need to happen because Jon and his lawyer did not really dispute anything. They made a slight argument about the amount of the fine that was levied, but they didn't dispute anything about the findings. But, Jones just hasn't grown up. And so here he is, sort of begging for mercy. And then under further questioning, we learned that he didn't even view the videos that USADA asks or demands that all these fighters watch. And in fact, demands it to the point where they're supposed to sign off if they watch these videos and they know the USADA rules. Well, he didn't watch the videos. He didn't sign it. He had his manager signing. So I guess I would say that my biggest takeaway is Jon Jones hasn't grown up, and his management isn't really helping him too much.
Biggest takeaway, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, my biggest takeaway, going into this, we didn't really know what sort of case they were going to try to present.
They were very bold about how strong they thought their case was.
Yeah,
in the pre-fight
it seems, they didn't have much of a case, if anything at all. I mean, their case was really, we had no idea what was going on. Please believe me, I'm innocent. I'm a good person. But we know, without proof, that doesn't really go too far. So, yeah, my biggest takeaway was sort of the lack of proof, the lack of things they brought to the table. I mean, the only thing they kind of mentioned was, the lie detector test, which we've talked about here before. But even then, they didn't really rely on that too much. It was just mainly Jon Jones saying, look, I'm a good person. And in his process of trying to do that, he didn't really do much favors to himself. They asked him if he's still drinking. He said yes.
Why is that a problem?
It's not really a problem, but, they're asking him, he's trying to make a case that, he's been a good person. I'm not saying if you drink, you're a bad person, but, they asked him other things like, what have you done that has improved your image, that has improved you and developed as a person, and, name specific examples, and he couldn't really name anything specifically. So in his case, when you're only trying to prove, hey, look, I'm a good person, and then you got all these things saying, your manager committed forgery, you didn't really watch the videos.
To be clear about that Brett Okamoto reported this, and I was told the exact same thing. It's not an actual signature. It's more like, you ever download iTunes? It's like, all right, here are the terms of service.
Yeah. That nobody reads.
It's like that. It's kind of like that. Now, that you're still responsible for that, and that's still a function of deceit. But I just want to be clear, he didn't sign like a legal document.
Right, it wasn't like a legal document. But, still, all these things didn't really make him look all that great for a case that he's trying to, put forward, hey, I'm a really good person. I would never do this to taint my career or the sport, So it definitely didn't help.
I mean, Danny brings up the drinking, and you question is why is that a problem? And here's where I would say it's a problem. Not that someone drinks, but the question was, well, the question was around his original DWI, and then someone said, one of the commissioners said, well, do you still drink alcohol? And his answer was just simply yes. Now I know he was just answering the question, but within the context, he needed to say, he needed to somehow point out how he's become more responsible. Yeah. So a better answer would have been, well, yes, I do, but I don't drink and drive. I understand that when I am enjoying myself, as all Americans are above the age of 21 are legally allowed to enjoy alcohol. I always have a designated driver, or I always make sure that I don't get in a car. So he never really he never thought deeply enough to think, well, what is behind this question? And so all these questions that were being thrown his way, he was answering them kind of lightly. Like even the one where about the forgery, when one of them said something like, well, have you ever considered changing your management? And like the screen, I was watching it on video, and the screen behind, you see Malky sort of his manager, Malky Caldwell, kind of chuckling to himself, and John says, yeah, I guess I have, and he turns around, oh, I'm just joking. He just wasn't taking this seriously enough, and this is kind of a microcosm of the way John seems to lead his life.
And also, I just want to quickly add, if you're trying to prove that, you've become more responsible, that you've changed, that you're trying to bring, change to the community, and you're this beacon that represents MMA well and whatnot, wouldn't you in all this process maybe want to do community service hours, do all those things? If that's the case you're trying to present, right? Like, look, I'm this responsible person. But when they asked him, okay, give me specific examples of what you've done, he didn't really have anything to say.
Yeah. Okay, so a couple points I would have in response to that. I think, number one, the question about whether you drink or not is totally irrelevant. I realize
it is, but so is the case of, oh, I'm a good person, I didn't think.
Yes and no. I think his character issues, people have noted that he brought those into the discussion, and therefore they're relevant. And I would agree that to an extent that's relevant. Mm-hmm. But whether or not he is drinking is not a function of character absent continued problems with the law, which, as I understand it, is not relevant at all. Moreover, in trying to assess his character, I think it's fair to say, well, what things are you doing? Asking him whether he is still enjoying legal opportunities, it has no bearing on this. It is, to me, it's much more about athletic commission grandstanding, knowing that the press was watching, because really you don't need any of that to, number one, assess whether he's made any changes, or to weigh the evidence of the case relative to the anti-doping infraction. So that's what I would say about this one. But you mentioned a point, Jeff. You said that he hasn't grown up. Is it that he hasn't grown up, or is it that he was defiant while having his case just wasn't very strong? He seemed defiant to me. I don't know that I saw him as immature. Are you saying he's immature?
Yeah, that was what I picked up. I mean, it also seemed that he wasn't taking things that seriously. I watched the earlier part of this hearing as well, when the two physicians, or the two doctors who were doing testing, they were being questioned, and it was all them succinctly testifying with figures or facts and figures when they had them, and when they didn't have them, they would couch their answer a little bit. They were kind of sophisticated in the way they answer the questions. And then we have a little break, and then Jones comes up there, and he's kind of like, "Yeah, let's do this, guys." I
mean, his opening statement was, "So we're here."
Yeah, it's kind of. I mean, here's why I think this is relevant. Even Andy Foster seems to. The executive director of the commission seems to be on board with saying Jones did not knowingly take some kind of substance. It was not knowingly try to cheat. I mean, I think that they established that, maybe not definitively, but pretty well, just by the fact that he tested negative on 2 tests surrounding this one, and so anybody who was actually trying to cheat would have been a very small window of opportunity. So it seemed reasonable to assume that he was not trying to cheat, but it was just recklessness. And I think that all the other things that he talked about kind of played into this idea of him being reckless. He tried to talk about how we tested this substance, we tested that substance, we did this, and he talked about all these things that they supposedly did. But then when it came down to putting down on paper what substances he was taking, what supplements he was taking before a UFC fight, he left some things off. I mean, there was a lot of places where it seemed to me that and I'm going to lump his management team in with this because they're on board with him. they just don't take these things seriously enough. So I think, well, okay, even if he's not trying to get an advantage by cheating using anabolic steroids, he's just not careful enough, or at least he's reckless enough to do things that might put him in that situation, and it might just do it all over again, as soon as he gets back into the cage.
Denny, what about that claim about the management? I heard a lot of people saying, how could he have been so unprepared? And part of it, I think, was I don't know that anybody thought that Maria Shen Urquidez was going to nail him to the wall. I think that took everybody by surprise, including his management team. But his attorney, Howard Jacobs, has that. This is, for folks who may not know what Howard Jacobs does, it's this. If you get an anti-doping infraction, he is the guy you call. He is the fixer. And he can't necessarily get people off scot-free, but if you have a 4-year suspension, he is famous for getting guys reduced down to 18 months or 2 years. He has exonerated people completely in the past. He is the guy you call for that, and he didn't have much of a case. I realize that maybe there was more they could have done in terms of prep for the commission questions. I think that's a valid criticism. But you look at this versus the case of, and I mentioned this before on my own podcast, Yoel Romero or Tim Means, or even the first Jon Jones case. They had physical evidence. There was no physical evidence.
None.
What more, honestly, could they reasonably have done?
I mean, you said it yourself. Getting prepared. I'm not ready to blame too much his management, because who knows? They could have prepared him for months, and then Jon Jones goes in and does that. You don't know.
You can prep a guy, and then when they go to do this kind of thing, they just fall apart.
Just like MMA, you can train a guy, you can put him in the best camp and throw him in the cage, and you don't know if he's going to perform or not. So I'm not too ready to sort of blame his management, but from his part, I do agree with Jeff. He took things very lightly, and he didn't have some of his facts straight. I think at one point he said the supplements he was taking were USADA approved, and from what I understand, USADA doesn't really approve any supplements.
They do not, right?
So that's already questions like, okay, well, you were supposed to know this, coming into this, if that's the case you're trying to make, right? So those little things like that were kind of off. So I'm not ready to blame his management, but I think Jon Jones could have done a better job as far as the way he was represented. Yeah, he didn't have much proof. He didn't have not much to work with, but I think what he was trying to get across could have been packaged better.
That's a fair point. Now, Jeff, that leads us to the punishment that was handed down. As we all know now, they took the max they're legally allowed to take for any kind of this infraction, 40% of his purse, or his declared purse anyway, not his total earnings, which is about $200,000, an additional $5,000 for some nominal nod towards.
I think that goes to Stephen A. Smith.
Yeah, who, by the way, was in the studio next to me yesterday. I couldn't believe it. Anyway, neither here nor there. So then another $5,000 for what they perceived to be a function of his pay-per-view earnings, although that's hilarious because it would have been reversed, if anything. But okay, and then they said, we're going to not suspend you, we're going to revoke your license until you can apply around August of 2018, pending, unless and until you resolve your USADA matters. I want to talk about USADA in a second, but as far as California is concerned, Jeff, did they get it right?
Well, you have a hearing. You bring the guys in to present a case, and they don't really present much of a case, other than, hey, we don't think you should have given us the max fine. Well, why? I mean, you're a multiple time offender, maybe not in the same state, but you are. I think it was fine. I mean, in a sense, I think they just kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit. They said, okay, we're gonna get some money out of you.
But no issue with the fine, no issue with the license revocation versus suspension.
Yeah, no, I mean, they did explain the difference between revoking the license and suspension, that he could then apply immediately upon being. Upon whatever time the USADA thing comes down, they can, if he gets cleared if he by some miracle got cleared by USADA right away, he could then apply for a license in August, I guess.
Right.
I had no problem with it.
Yeah, I think they just sort of passed down the ball to USADA, and in some ways I understand it, because their hands are tied. I mean, a lot of what the result is depends on USADA, because what if they say suspend him for a year, but then USADA suspends him for 2? He can't compete anyways, right? So. But they did fine him 40%, which was I believe the max that they could fine him. I was fine with that, and we'll see what happens with USADA, which I believe they should be a lot harsher, maybe.
We'll see about that. So that brings me to we would talk.
What did you think, though? You asked that question. I'm thinking you maybe have a different opinion about it.
I thought that if that's all he gets, which is a year because we're dating back to the original source of infraction, plus a $200,000 fine. I mean, that's not, as a portion of his earnings, it's not a significant amount.
Yeah, he probably made millions.
Probably made millions, but I mean, geez, it's a pretty hefty fine just on its own. Yeah. If that's all he got, I'd be very satisfied, because I just don't feel like making him sit out for 2 years makes a lot of sense, but I realize a lot of people disagree with me about this topic. So that brings me to this USADA portion of the conversation, which is really the X factor here, because if it's all just California, it's really not that big a deal, to be quite honest. However, it could end up being, depending on what they do. This is, to me, no one's talking about this, but I think this is a huge, huge deal. Let's put together a piece of the facts here if we can. Number one, Francisco Rivera, for a first offense. Now, he did engage in what they alleged was trying to almost tamper with evidence. So they gave him the death penalty, which is basically 4 years. Now, he could come back after that, but I mean, that's more or less your career is over, right? Then people didn't pay attention to this. First-time offender, Ruslan Magomedov, he got 2 years, and he even challenged the finding when he had Austrian in his system. Same thing that Tim Means had. He tried to show that this was not the case. USADA overruled him at I believe a subsequent hearing, and then gave him 2 years for a first offense. Here we have a case of Jon Jones, where, again, I don't know that the thing of Malki Kawa signing off on the online courses is the end of the world, but you add it as part of the package. Then you have this fact that it's a second offense. Then you add to the fact that, unlike the first case, he has no physical evidence. But here is what I'm wondering. This, to me, is like, is USADA going to do what they say they're going to do? Personally, I would like to see him just get the year. That is me speaking. But if they are going to remain even close to consistent about their worldview, how do you not give him, at a bare minimum, 2 years, Jeff? This is I'm not going to say a make or break moment for USADA, but we're going to find out how serious they are about really hammering people for anti-doping infractions fairly across the board.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree with you. It's and I think that whole signing versus not signing the video thing, I think that may become more significant than it should be. I mean, look, I think anybody who's worked in a big company, I do this all the time, working for...
Steel?
Well, no, but I working for ESPN, part of Disney. I'm always getting notifications. You have to go through this, this video for a half hour, and then somehow it's this. And I work remotely from my house, and yet I still have to look, read through things about different things like office-related things that really are not relevant to me, but I still have to do it, and so I do it. I watch the videos, and then I take the test at the end, and then sign off that I did it. That's just part of what you have to do. And John, if you're going to compete as a mixed martial artist in the era of USADA, you're going to have to watch the video and at least see what the rules are. So even though I kind of agree with you that it's not, or it shouldn't be a huge deal, the fact that he basically spat in their faces essentially by not looking at the thing and then having his management, check off the box that he did, I think that they could take that as an affront and give him more of a fine. Now, I don't think that. I think that might be, like you're saying, maybe like a 2-year thing as opposed to a 1. I don't think that. I know the 4 years is on the table, but it just seems unfathomable.
Well, okay, but why does that seem unfathomable? How do you do that to Francisco Rivera? Okay, but that shouldn't make sense.
No, it shouldn't.
So help me out here, Danny. What's USADA going to do here? What's the right call for USADA based on their mission statement, based on the evidence? How do you throw Ruslan Magomedov for 2 years for a first offense that he challenged, and you're going to do the same thing for this? That doesn't compute.
Yeah, it doesn't seem fair, and that's what we're going to find out. Because when USADA came into the sport, they were sort of seen, I feel like, as this knight that's going to come in and clean up the sport.
Well, by donks, not by your boy, but okay, yes.
And so when they've dealt with other situations, the Francisco Riveras of the world, Francisco Rivera is a great fighter, but he's not a huge star like Jon Jones. You can't compare him. Now, if the UFC were to lose Francisco Rivera, right, it's not the end of the world for them. Again, he's a great fighter, a good addition to the division, but doesn't really move the needle. But Jon Jones, this is the biggest star they've dealt with.
He is the needle. I mean, he is.
Yeah, and this is
yeah, he is the needle.
This is a huge test for USADA to see how they're going to handle it.
What should they do?
And the UFC. I mean UFC ultimately, they're the ones that brought USADA in, and if USADA starts, picking off their big stars, and I mean, I know there's no love lost between the UFC, Dana White, and Jon Jones, but he still is, you know, a needle-moving guy. And if California gives him a sanction that allows him to come back this summer, but then USADA says, well, sorry, not so fast. We're going with 4 years or something. The UFC, that might be a game changer for the UFC.
And it should be, because that would be absurd.
Yeah, and the maximum penalty here is 4 years. I mean, in giving everything that, you know, all his like past record, it points that it should be, you know, it's hard. These things are hard to say because I'm talking about somebody's career here. So, you know, I don't want to say, yeah, he deserves 4 years because, you know, it's, you know, we're talking about somebody's entire career here. But I guess, you know, the fair thing would do, and considering USADA's track record, would be to give him 2.5, close to 3, something like that, you know.
Wow.
This is how insane this entire conversation is.
Yeah.
In my judgment.
If they're trying to keep...
Does anybody really feel like justice will be served? That will really, you're going to deter fighters with that? What a farcical notion this is. You've taken away none of the incentives to cheat. You have all of the incentives to cheat are always still there, but you're going to tack on this criminalization at the other end. You're going to take away this guy's prime for some sort of knight in shining armor nonsense that doesn't even work. I can't believe people buy into this. I cannot believe people, and by the way, everyone's like, I've seen people being like, let's hammer Jon Jones, let's take away 4 years, throw the book at him. You're gonna be the same donk in 6 months on my timeline crying about how the UFC doesn't have any big fights. I wonder if there's a connection.
But I don't think that should be factored in, the fact that the UFC does or doesn't have big fights. I don't think that the...
In terms of how you saw the hands on
Yeah, I don't think that...
Yeah, of course not.
But I think that to me, an organization like that should have some discretion regarding, you know, intent. I mean, and it seems as though from the way those experts were speaking yesterday, and even Andy Foster seemed to acknowledge it, that Jones is more likely, it may not necessarily, but more likely guilty of being irresponsible, reckless, whatever.
Negligent, they called him.
Negligent, okay, sure. Now, who's it you mentioned earlier who tampered with evidence?
Allegedly, Francisco Rivera.
Okay, so allegedly. Someone who does that, someone who you know, runs from a test, if that's a...
He doctored, they allege he doctored paperwork to show he had acquired essentially clenbuterol from stuff in Mexico.
Right.
Long story.
So if that kind of allegation turns out to be true, I just don't see how you can equate these two things. One is a person who is clear, who you've proven has the intent to cheat, and one person is reckless. Now, I know that the bottom line, you know, is both those people would have a substance in their body that they're not supposed to have in there, but, you know, it just seems as though the intent should be factored in. The number of times that you tested. I mean, if you're tested 3 times within the course of what, like 5 weeks or so, 6 weeks, and 2 of them come out negative and 1 doesn't, that at least to me suggests, and I guess the experts seem to back that up, that this is not a person who is on a you know, an ongoing regimen of this substance. So, I mean, I would like to think that an organization like USADA can factor in those kinds of details, and that would bring them back down to a more reasonable sanction.
Well, I mean, intent is sort of hard to measure. You know, like how do you know if Jon Jones was, you know, he could say all he wants, he could have taken that polygraph test, but at the end of the day, you don't really know what went down. You're just sort of in the mercy of believing him or not. But the fact is, you know, he is a second offender, right? A repeating offender. And, you know, he has no proof this time around to sort of create some sort of doubt that there could be a window where, you know, this could have happened, where he, you know, that supplement could have been in his system without intent. So yeah, that's kind of rough. Jon Jones has a really tough case right here, and it comes down to USADA to see what they're gonna do with the UFC's biggest star. I mean, at the end of the day, USADA's hired by the UFC, so we'll see what happens.
All right, so let's move along. Enough of that. Let's get on to UFC 222 this weekend. Here's what occurs to me about UFC 222, if I may. You've got Brian Ortega taking on Cub Swanson, right? That's an interesting fight.
Yeah.
No, Frank Yeager.
So what am I saying? Cub Swanson, Frank Yeager. Yes, geez, Louise. Damn you, Amtrak. Now, on top of that, you have Yana Kunitskaya taking on Chris Cyborg. Not necessarily the biggest name in the sport, even as an up-and-coming talent, but sort of, let's call her a fresh face.
Yeah.
You have the debut of Mackenzie Dern. She is also on this card. You have Ketlin Vieira going up against Kat Zingano. That's an interesting fight for a lot of reasons. And there's a couple other fights down the list you can go into. Here's my point. It appears to me that UFC 222, there's a lot of value to it.
Yeah.
Not least of which, Danny, is that there is a real possibility you could have several breakout stars from this contest, probably most notably Brian Ortega.
Yep.
I'm wondering, do you think that the matchmaking was intentional for an organization that knows we've got Sean O'Malley, by the way, against Andre Sukmantat? There's another one you can add to the list. Do you think that they were like, we've got to start stacking these cards with as many prospects as we can find, and let's see them fight it out for media and, let's say, cultural awareness supremacy?
Somewhat, but part of me just thinks they're just plugging in fights and you know, trying to just fill cards as they go. You know, a good example of that would be you would think, oh, this is all about the stars, but I think Mackenzie Dern and Sean O'Malley are not going to be at the open workouts, if
That's
I'm not
correct,
mistaken.
yeah.
So it's like, okay, if you're trying to put on the stars, right, the rising stars, the potential stars on this card, and sort of trying to make this card sort of that theme. Don't you think you would have sort of a media day for them, or an open workout for them, considering that, you know, Mackenzie Dern, you know, very attractive lady, you know, probably be good for open workouts, you know, for the fan base as well. Sean O'Malley has a huge personality. That would be a good guy to put in an open workouts and have him show off and do his things. Plus, he has a funky, you know, striking style. So I'm not entirely sure if that was intentional or not, but it is. This card has a bunch of stars. Potential stars that, you know, have a great potential of becoming something. You know, we know Frankie Edgar, if he beats Brian Ortega, that's big, but, you know, we know it doesn't really add to his profile. Same thing with Chris Cyborg if she defeats Yana Kunitskaya. So I think the potential breakout stars here are Caitlin Vieira, Sean O'Malley, Mackenzie Dern, and, you know, possibly
Brian Ortega.
Brian Ortega, yeah, especially Brian Ortega.
The crown
yeah.
jewel is Brian Ortega.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, if Kunitskaya were to beat Cyborg, that is like an instant ticket to stardom. I mean, really, that is in some ways bigger than Holly Holm knocking out Ronda Rousey.
Really?
Well, I'm not saying that she becomes that level of star, but in terms of
the accomplishment?
in terms of the accomplishment, because Holly Holm had that pedigree, and there was always that possibility. Nobody has come close to Cyborg, and this is, I mean, the odds are ridiculous in this one. So I mean, I think that there were some people who thought, well, you know, Holly Holm's great striker, she might be able to handle this. I don't know that there's anybody out there who's you know, looking at Cyborg as a loser on Saturday night. So that would be an instant road to there. I think Vieira is also the one because she's fighting, you know, all the other people who are fighting somebody, you know, Ortega certainly has a shot with Frankie Edgar, but Frankie Edgar is a guy who, you know, kills these kind of people. He's the one who, and all the new rising stars, you know, Frankie Edgar just takes care of them. But Vieira, she's fighting Kat Zingano, someone who's fought twice in the last 3.5 years.
Last fight was UFC 200.
Yes.
Her last two fights were losses, Juliana Pena and Ronda Rousey.
Right.
Yeah.
But she's still a name fighter. So if you can go in there and fight somebody who's, you know, is kind of rusty, but still has that name, still has somewhat of a reputation, and put on a great performance, you know, that to me, that's the way you elevate yourself. There's other ones, I mean, you have to, if Mackenzie Dern goes out there and has a great performance, it's gonna have to be really, really great because she's not fighting a recognizable name opponent.
Sure, although she made a name in LFA, I can't really remember the names of her opponents because she was pretzeling them up like it was nothing. She had a rear naked choke omoplata. Remember that?
Yeah.
It was just sort of some absurd choke that she was able to get. So if she can do that against Ashley Yoder, she'd be in good shape. But I want to focus, if I may, on Brian Ortega. Yana Kunitskaya, by the way, and shout-outs to Todd Martin of Sherdog. He's the only one talking about this. He's sort of arguing her reign of dominance, you know, undefeated since basically her pro debut, Cyborg. It could be coming to a close. Not that he's like picking Yana Kunitskaya in some way, but that, you know, the sky falls overnight for some of these people. Yeah. Her reign has been absurdly long. You just never know. In the USADA era, we'll see. Anyway, I would encourage you to go check out Todd Martin's argument, but I want to focus on Brian Ortega for a second. This guy is super interesting. No one talks about this. Every fight he's had in the UFC, he's won. Now, his first one against Mike Del Toro was a no contest. We all know the story there. But people don't talk about this. He has literally finished every single person he's fought. Every single one. That is insane to me. And, Danny, he stands out to me for a couple of reasons, not least of which is his style so exciting. Yeah. But on top of that, in a game where everyone is doing the sort of Colby Covington thing, where they're, you know, talking about terrible, unspeakable things on Twitter, he goes the exact opposite direction, like a Rose Namajunas. And I don't think it's a put on. I think that's who he is. I really believe if you can beat Frankie Edgar, and he wants to be the first one to stop him, which would be, I mean, forget about it. Yeah. I think he has a big potential to be certainly a featherweight contender, but a star in the sport.
Yeah, I mean, he's already a contender. Even if he loses to Frankie Edgar.
I mean, like immediate title shot.
Right. It wouldn't be the end of the world for him. He'd be right there. He'd be a win or two, depending on how things play out in that division. But yeah, this guy's a little bit of a fresh air. He's kind of reminds me of Max Holloway. Brings that. I'll fight anybody, and it's not like these guys are. I mean, he is very respectful, but he's not shy of saying, "Yo, I'm gonna finish him." So I think that's very important. And yeah, he's young. And he's got tons of skills, and he keeps improving every time. If he beats Frankie Edgar, I mean, who's beaten Frankie Edgar? I mean, just only the very top guys, and the very top guys have even squeaked out wins.
Decisions,
yeah.
So nobody is
if Ortega goes in there and finish him, gets on the mic, and he doesn't even have to.
Dude,
yeah, he doesn't even have to say anything. Just finishes Frankie Edgar. He's up there for a title shot, and all of a sudden you got a new player in that division, a new star that you can start pairing up with other fighters and making big cards.
Yeah, if he finishes Frankie Edgar, yeah, the sky's the limit. If he goes out there and even gets a decision win and his sort of streak of finishes ends, but he still gets a win over Frankie Edgar, that's immense. I mean, so yeah, he has a couple of ways to certainly raise his profile, and one way to raise it in a huge way. I think you point out his personality, his respect for the game. These are for me, it's a very refreshing thing. I know not everybody feels that way. I know some people love the trash talk. I see a person like him, and you mentioned Namajunas. I see those kind of fighters. There's something noble and honorable about that I really appreciate, especially because when the cage door shuts and they go to fight, they're no longer nice guys anymore. They're going out there to kill you, and then as soon as they do it, they become nice again. I mean, I love the way that those athletes who can switch it on like that, who don't have to become a jerk for the entirety of the lead up. I love that ability to just switch it on, switch it off.
So another interesting component here is I think the fan base is really hyped about him. If you look at online metrics, there's a lot of interest around what he's been doing. For example, I did an interview with him at 214 when he fought Renato Moicano, I believe. Yeah. At the time, it had like 4,000 views. I checked the other day. I don't know where it got posted. It had 107,000 views. You look for the countdown, right? The countdown itself on UFC's channel has about 100,000. I don't know, the main event, something like that as well. The co-main event between those two, 250,000. Like, there is clear online interest about this guy from the hardcore fan base, and if he does something spectacular, I think that can bloom to the larger community. Now, I wanted to talk about Cyborg, but we're just a little too short on time. Other than just a quick note, feels like there's just buzz is not the right word. Just no real narrative about this fight. How could there be? It was on short notice. We're pulling someone up from bantamweight. But you made the point, Jeff. I'm telling you, if you listen to Todd Martin, and he's not picking Yana Kunitskaya, but he's sort of saying, this bus might be showing up more than you think it might be. If she wins on Saturday, and let's say Ortega finishes Frankie Edgar, it could be a historic night in the history of the sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, it ends for everybody. Nobody, Father Time kicks the ass of every single fighter out there eventually, but nobody has really got to that point with Cyborg yet. I mean, I think one of the reasons that the buzz about this has been pretty minimal is that we were kind of teased with a Amanda Nunes fight against Cyborg, and that was going to be the bantamweight champion who's going to go in there and fight her, and that was certainly an exciting possibility. And now it's kind of downgraded to this. So it's not Chris Cyborg's fault. She's fighting the people that they put in front of her, but. I guess she sort of needs some more exciting challenges before Father Time catches up to her.
Let me move on, Dan. We just don't have enough time. We could probably talk about this on After the Beat or something. So the other big issue from the past week, it's largely been resolved, but there's a big underlying issue about it. The knee from Jeremy Stephens. Now, every referee has weighed in with what should have happened. None of their answers I thought were bad, but ultimately not satisfying either. And then I actually emailed the Florida Commission this week. They got back to me. They told me on the Friday before the fight, maybe even the day of the fight, but in either case, the commission met to consider in the future whether they want to, they're going to have like an exploratory committee about whether or not they want to have instant replay in their state. Now, we can have a lot of different arguments here about instant replay, about how that should have been handled, did the knee land, all kinds of stuff. Here, to me, is the bigger issue. You can now go to a state that can have the modern unified rules and instant replay, or not the modern unified rules, but instant replay, or instant replay, but not the modern unified rules, or no instant replay, no unified rules, modern unified rules. This is insanity. Plus, the referee has an impossible job. He's watching Jeremy Stevens hammer Josh Emmett into oblivion. That's his primary concern. Whether or not a knee landed is even harder to tell. And the UFC, people are like, what can you do to change these rules? We talked about judging criteria. Here's the bigger issue to me, to round this all out. The UFC bragged, I think correctly, that they ran towards regulation when they purchased it from the SEG owners. And I think that probably did save the sport. Here's the problem. It is now, I don't know if killing it, but it is certainly hurting it, because now you're having different rule sets depending on what city you're fighting in. And on top of that, you have no real ability to change rules that clearly need to be updated. Maybe it makes sense to have 2 refs. Maybe it makes sense to have mandatory instant replay. And they can't do it because they have no control over it. This seems to me, Jeff, like a major issue. No?
Yeah. Well, obviously, seems like every fight card we're hearing about, this or that. Somebody didn't stop the fight in time, or somebody that did something else, and so between refs and judges at cage side, there's always some sort of controversy. Here's what my takeaway from this whole thing was: when in the moment that fight was happening, when I saw Jeremy Stevens throw that knee, and it was very clear that Josh Emmett was grounded. It seemed to me that I thought he landed. And now, as I saw a replay, it looked like maybe he missed on the way up, but he got him on the way down. All that stuff. But in that moment, he clearly threw a strike that was going to be illegal if it landed. I guess would not. And it seemed to me that was a moment for the referee to jump in and pause the action. Now I know someone can come back and say, well, he missed them, so why should you be pausing it? But it seems like if you're going to err on the side of, if you're going to err on one side or the other, you look at a strike that is clearly being thrown in an illegal way, right? There's no way if the strike lands, it is clearly illegal, and if it doesn't land, he was, you don't throw a knee unless you're trying to hit somebody, and so if you happen to miss him, he happened to miss him. It seemed to me that was a moment when that referee should have jumped in. All the other stuff that surrounded it, there was a lot of strikes to the back of the head. That stuff happens so fast. I think it's really difficult for a referee to keep on top of it. Sometimes the strikes are landing here, sometimes right there.
Refs in all sports miss calls, but they usually have a chance to fix it with video evidence.
That's part 2 of it. See, because if you pause it, then you have to have the ability to either say, well, I'm taking a point away because you did this, or
once they use instant replay, fight's over. That's the rule. Once you go to replay, fight's over.
Well, then there are going to be a lot of. It's also going to cause a lot of problems then, because you're going to have, like, say this one, if Murgulata jumps in, then they go to replay, and let's say they see he didn't land that knee. That knee missed him, and let's say it didn't come back down and touch him on the way down, so there's no technicality. Well, now you've just ended a fight that shouldn't have been ended. So there's always going to be that, but I think if you're going to make errors, you have to be erring on the side of fighter safety, not on the other side. I think in this case, a fighter really was beaten up in a way that he should not have been beaten up.
Danny?
I think the biggest issue here, we can all agree that regulation is needed, or else it'd be a street fight, right? You need to regulate for it to be a sport. The problem here is that the rules are not the same in every state. So, a lot of people say, oh, but it's so difficult for fighters to know, what they're dealing with. That's true. But it's also difficult for referees, because, now every single time they're stepping in, there might be different rules, and they're operating under different circumstances. And when you're in the cage, you only got seconds to decide, on things. So you need to know the rules, like the back of your hand. You need to know the rules, like you know the whole thing.
Yes, you need to know the rules. Yes.
But it's hard to know all the rules if they keep changing, they keep alternating things. And, even Jeremy Stevens, when he came up there to try to explain his case, he was sort of confused about the rules, and fighters are not really sure what's going on. And that goes to refs as well.
Hold on. Neither of you are addressing my point. Does this not keep you up at night?
Yeah, it's a huge issue.
The fact that, hold on a second, we haven't reached the end of these problems. The problems are going to keep multiplying, and we have zero mechanism by which to deal with them in any kind of way at scale. Like, we can talk about this one incident, we can talk about that
it's a job for the commissions to get together.
The problem is we have enshrined in bureaucratic law the way to change the rules. That is I mean, this might be the biggest problem facing the sport to an extent. No?
Yeah.
Every other sport has the ability to make adjustments and change the shot clock or move the kickoff line, or we have no ability to do that at all.
Well, that's why if you're going to go and make some kind of sweeping change like instant replay, well, as you point out, you're right. They only employ that when the fight's over. Well, why does it have to be that way? In football, we go to replay. Oh yeah, it was a catch. Well, it wasn't a catch. Now we go to the next play. Well, in this case, it would have been a perfect solution. I know that then these guys both get a rest, but it's sort of like the 5-minute rule if you get kicked in the groin.
Agreed.
He throws a knee. It looks like it's an illegal knee. Mergliata jumps in, says time. Go to replay. Well, it was not an illegal strike, so I'm not taking a point away. Oh, it was he did get him, so it's an illegal strike, 1 point.
Warning.
Or the 15th warning. But I think that there are ways to make these rules better. So even if they just instill instant replay as it now stands, that's not enough even there. So just making it all consistent still falls short, because that would have still ended that fight.
Are you not worried about this?
Yeah, of course, it's a huge issue. And, it's definitely affecting the fights, the results. I mean, we're talking about it now. And it's something they need to address. Like soccer, for example, has been around for forever. So the rules are kind of, they've been modified.
Even then they're changing them.
And even then they're adding the VAR, to check, and some, for example, Spain doesn't have it yet, I believe, but, other leagues in Europe have it as well. So they're still, even though it's a sport that's been around forever, they're still looking for ways to improve it as technology comes around, other issues come around. MMA just seems like, okay, this is what we got, this is what it is. But
imagine if you have to lobby the Spanish government to make a change, and then go to the French government, and then go to the German government. I know that they're trying to expand this, and they're trying to find a way to get it sanctioned and legalized. And when I may say sanctioned, I mean in the broader sense of the term. But they might want to reconsider that, because if you can have a territory where you can be in control of the rules, I would favor that at this point. We are headed down a path, and no one seems to realize this. We are headed down a path where, for now, it's the Jeremy Stevens fight. It's going to be another fight the next week, and another fight the next week, and it's going to be another wrinkle and another wrinkle. People have been talking about how we're going to solve judging. You can't. You can't. What can you do except going state to state to state again with some new state criteria? It's a mess. All right, let's move on. Sorry about that. It's just driving me crazy. 2 quick points, and then we'll get to the after the beat. 2 quick topics I want to get to. Number 1, Dana White went on the Kevin Harvick show. He has a radio show. And he was asked, what was the likelihood that Brock Lesnar comes back and to fight in the UFC? I believe even 2018. And he said, very, very, very good. 3 veries.
Wow.
Danny, do you want to see Brock Lesnar back in the UFC? That is the question for you.
Well,
do you want to see?
I kind of do, yeah. In this, in this space where we're looking for big stars, I want to see, Brock Lesnar back. And I know there's so many asterisks around him, but I mean, this guy's just very unique. I mean, just his frame. I mean, we've already seen what he can do in the cage, but we still wonder, what if he fights this guy? People are wondering, what if he fights Jon Jones? All these things. And Brock Lesnar is just such an interesting character. I know there's so many asterisks around him, but honestly, I would like to see him back in. I think it'll spice things up, and the heavyweight division becomes exciting. Now sort of the light heavyweight division is kind of merging into the heavyweight division just because there's not much going on. So just imagine Cormier Brock, Jon Jones Brock, right? If Jon Jones returns, Stipe Brock, who knows? I mean, you just throw Brock in any.
You're naming all these people who have done something different than Brock. Every single one of them. DC, Stipe, Ngannou, all these guys have won a fight since 2010.
Yeah.
Okay? So we're talking about a guy who, I mean, let's face it, this is a guy who the UFC wants to bring back because he's going to bring money.
Well, he did beat Mark Hunt, sort of.
Yeah.
No, he beat him. It's just
That's not
Right,
really
but
what
the
I
whole thing
saw.
was
I looked
vacated.
it up on Wikipedia, and it looked like it was a big
I know.
NC there.
He got his hand raised at the end of the fight, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, he did. Okay, so
I mean, you sort of refer as Brock Lesnar as this guy that he hasn't won a fight in forever, sort of like a Tito Ortiz when
Or
he
a,
was in.
or a Diaz or something.
Right.
he's
But this is a guy that, not so long ago competed, looked good, although under, certain asterisks there under certain circumstances, and, proved that he could beat, I guess, a top-level guy in Mark Hunt.
I'm certainly exaggerating in my lack of interest in seeing him, but I would say that my interest in seeing him is a lot lower than my interest in seeing Jon Jones back. And I know that both these guys have drug issues that have waylaid their career. But Jones was
One of the greatest,
the greatest fighter that ever fought. And Brock, certainly had a time way back when he could just impose his will. But I'm just not that interested. And I feel as though his biggest appeal right now is the payday. And that's not my concern. That's not what makes me want to watch the sport. I don't think, I only want to see Conor McGregor come back because he's going to generate huge pay-per-view dollars. No, I want to see Conor McGregor come back because he's a really good fighter.
You wouldn't watch Francis Ngannou, Brock Lesnar?
Of course I would watch it. I'm not saying
the question is with your pants on. That's the real qualifier.
Yeah, my pants will stay on for that one.
Not mine. I can't wait to see Brock back. Are you kidding me? People are like, Brock Lesnar returned. Are you interested? Of course I'm interested. How could you not be interested? He is polarizing. He's kind of mean to people.
Yeah.
He's a huge, imposing figure. It would be, obviously, to sit on top of a card. They'd probably build a good card around it. They're doing these the triple headers now when they come to New York, or double headers, depending on which part of New York they're in anyway. Of course I want to see him back. I mean, it's not, I agree, I wouldn't be in it because, Brock's going to make money. Yippee. No, I don't care about that at all. Yeah. But for me, like, the sport is just exciting when he's around. He does crazy things. He says crazy things. And he's captivating. He's completely captivating as a figure. So the correct answer, Jeff, is yes.
All right, if you insist.
All right, that takes us to, let's go to the last one here if we can. Of course, we're on this abbreviated timeline. But it was announced this week, Amazon was going to be selling UFC pay-per-views. They're going to start with this weekend, UFC 222. Now, Danny, I believe you wrote this article for MMA Fighting.
I did, yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong about this. It's going to start with UFC 222. That part I know. It'll be same price, $64.99. You don't need to be a Prime member to watch it, correct? You can buy it. Did I miss any of the details with this? We don't know anything else about the length of the deal.
Yeah, we don't know how long it's going to be.
So let me just pitch this to you then. To me, this is highly intriguing. What's the long-term aim here? Do they want to lower the price of pay-per-view for Amazon Prime subscribers to drive subscriptions to that? I don't really know. Is this the end of Fight Pass? I don't really know. What do you make of this? It's a small arrangement, but it seems to portend a future.
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not really sure what to make of it because, like, in some sort of way, like, okay, so you're not offering a discount to Prime members, and you don't need to be a Prime member to get it. But if you have the Fire Stick, which many people have, you can just, like that itself, which is Amazon owned, has the UFC Fight Pass app. So you can get pay-per-views, right? The only difference here is that now you can get pay-per-views, UFC pay-per-views on Amazon.com, right? But you can just do the same thing, go on Fight Pass. In fact, if you get, I believe, a pay-per-view on Fight Pass, and you're not a Fight Pass member, they give you 6 months for free.
So why would they do that?
My guess would be, one, just opening an avenue so it becomes more accessible, just because people, now you have another route to buy the UFC pay-per-view. I don't know how successful that's going to be. I'm not sure people are like, scrolling, trying to buy something for their home. They're like, oh, wow, look, a little commercial for UFC pay-per-view. Let me add it to my cart. I don't think that, but, Amazon is a huge engine. How many people, do you have an Amazon account?
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
So they might be posting, little things here and there. Maybe when you click on videos, they'll have a pop-up of the poster, so that can create some exposure. And then just sort of opening the avenue. We know that, their TV deal is with Fox ends in December, right? And maybe they're just opening that option, see how well it does. Maybe who knows? Maybe Amazon brings in, a lot of customers. And maybe that can be an avenue where they can start, testing the waters.
Yeah, the UFC has forever been trying to get more into the mainstream, and it doesn't get much more mainstream in terms of commerce in this country than Amazon. It's one of the, it's prevalent, it's ubiquitous. Everybody is on Amazon, buying their, not just, it used to be books, but now it's like books are like the least thing that you can go on Amazon to buy. And
you go grocery
and it's
shopping.
it's a different mentality than, those of us here might have a relationship with the UFC Fight Pass, but there are a lot of people out there who are, they're kind of vaguely interested in MMA, but they're not that interested they're going to have any kind of connection with the Fight Pass. They're not going to be a subscriber to it. They're probably not even going to be interested in checking it out, but hey, I'm on Amazon. There's some fights tonight. Let's just go for it. So I think it's going to boost the UFC incursion into the mainstream a bit. I also think it's a big deal for Amazon. I mean, I think it's on their end of it.
I believe it's their first pay-per-view.
It's their
like live package.
Right. It's one more way in which Amazon is going to get people to continue cutting the cord and just getting their stuff online. So I think certainly for Amazon it's a huge deal. I think for the UFC, it's another step in the right direction.
I have a couple of competing theories. One is that I think that they might actually start packaging the pay-per-views at a cheaper price for Prime members to drive subscriptions. Probably unlikely, but maybe. Maybe Amazon wants to get into not only the UFC store business where you're selling gloves and T-shirts and everything else, but maybe as a ticket distributor as well. You want to buy UFC tickets, you can do it on here, right? They might put things together in packages. That's another way. They might be getting rid of Fight Pass and just punt it over to Amazon. Amazon is a great place for video if you're looking around, but it doesn't have the reputation that a Netflix does. Yes. This is a reputational boost, the beginning of a small one. Could be that, so I guess we'll have to see. But in any case, highly, highly intriguing for this weekend. So we'll see how things go. All right, so here's how this is going to go. This part of the program is going to end, but now we're going to go, you can see the link below right there, live.twitter.com/MMA fighting. You can go there for After the Beat. You have submitted your questions and comments to us using the hashtag #TheMMABeat. We have read them, we have selected them, and we're going to use them now in our second segment. So go over to that link, join us now. Thank you so much for watching this part, but now we go over to Twitter for After the Beat. See you there.